grain of sand, one 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 drop of water in the sea, one grain of sand, one little...
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Virtual Ojai Talks. My name is Fiona Digney. I am the producer and artistic administrator of the Ojai Music Festival, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very last Virtual Ojai Talks before we see each other in person in Ojai, June 9 to 12th. I am delighted to be introducing tonight's guests on behalf of Artistic and Executive Director Ara Guzlimian, who is currently in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. We thought it would be best to not wake him up at 2:30 in the morning to introduce everyone. This evening we'll be talking about 3 pieces that are happening at the festival this year, all world premieres. Open rehearsal, which will be happening on Friday and Sunday, and The Cello Player and How to Fall Apart, which will both be happening on Saturday up at Zog Theatre. We are joined by 5 of the AMOC members today, choreographers and dancers Bobbi Jene or Schraiber and Julia Eichten, as well as violinist Keir GoGwilt and cellist Coleman Itzkoff. And right now, I'm very happy to be handing over the hosting duties to the wonderful John Schaefer, who is joining us again and is the creator of New Sounds, a fantastic podcast and space online, newsounds.org, for all things new music. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Fiona. It's great to have so much of AMOC with us this evening, because obviously you guys are going to be very busy in a couple of weeks. And Bobbi, I'd like to start by talking about the world premiere piece Open Rehearsal, which happens on Friday the 10th, and then there's a repeat performance on Sunday the 12th. It is billed as a world premiere, and indeed it will be a premiere, but it's kind of built on the scaffolding or the foundation of a pre-existing piece called Broken Theater. Can you explain how that works?
Yes, happy to be with all of you. Thanks for having us. So Broken Theater is a piece that we are currently still working on. And we started developing that in October 2020. And we have continued to work on that and throughout this time. And Open Rehearsal is going to be a piece that kind of breaks apart that piece. So Broken Theater kind of works on trying to dissect different elements of the theater and kind of playing with the roles of, the role we're trying to play and the role that we're actually playing, and in life and in theater. And it's flipping it once again and making a rehearsal of the performance, which turns into the performance.
So I can't help but note the date that you mentioned, October 2020, pre-vaccine, height of the pandemic. Were you all together? How were you able to create any kind of broken theater at all?
It was a crazy time. We were all bubbled at MassMocha and
in North Adams, Massachusetts. Yeah.
And we were about to go back to the city to La Mama experimental theater. And kind of, we were all imagining these empty theaters that were sitting completely broken. And with all the stories that they once held, and how could what happened if this group of artists got stuck there, and who would they perform for, and what roles would they be interested in, and what pieces would they still remember by heart, And would they perform for each other? What would happen? And that's kind of where it all started from.
Okay. So open rehearsal suggests a kind of pulling aside of the curtain, the fourth wall, you know, and letting us as the audience witness how the sausage is made, essentially. But if that's a part of the piece, then you know, it very quickly devolves into a, you know, it's turtles all the way down, you know, it's like, where does it stop? So, I mean, it's almost, you're raising almost philosophical questions about your roles as dancers and musicians, our roles as viewers slash voyeurs. I mean, you know, it's almost like we're seeing something we're not supposed to see.
Yes, I hope that we create that feeling and experience. And I think that, you know, I feel as a performer, I've always been interested in rehearsing as I perform and performing as I rehearse, and trying to get rid of that line between what is the performance and what is the rehearsal. And I think that open rehearsal will really kind of flip that and play with, are you watching a rehearsal, and is that any different than watching the performance? And how fast does the magic take over?
Well, let me ask, you know, some of the musicians, Coleman and Keir, I mean, performing in front of an audience or doing an open rehearsal, as orchestras will often do, you know, the difference between those two is often pretty slim. What is it like? I mean, Keir, as a violinist who has an important solo role to play, how different does it feel to you? How different is the process of entering this work?
I think maybe even a bigger distinction for me than the difference between the sort of open rehearsal feel and the sort of performance proper feel is just interacting with the world of dance and gesture and theater as a musician. And I think that my role in Bobbi's work has kind of evolved over the years. I think in our first piece, A Study on Effort, it was very much kind of like a durational thing. There wasn't much theater at all involved. And it sort of developed into more theatrical things, figuring out like, who is this person on the stage with the violin? Who is this person on the stage with the cello? Who are they as characters, and why are they bringing music, and what functions does the music play within this theatrical space? And I think that Broken Theater kind of is a sort of next step in that, in terms of, as you said, kind of like pulling the curtains aside and allowing for more of that like openness and that sort of multiplicity of roles and identities just seep in even more. So
Yeah, it's interesting that you know, you bring up the distinction of having to kind of be aware of and respond to the presence of dancers on the stage with you. Julia, or you know, you have the same issue, if it is an issue, the same opportunity, the same challenge to deal with, which is suddenly there's a musician, sometimes more than one, sharing the stage with you. Julia, what's that process like for you?
Gosh, well, I think it's first such a true pleasure to have both of these worlds combined so closely and intimately, and to have that oral experience of actually feeling yourself inside of music, which we often imagine as dancers, to really have that texture alive on stage with you, and you can almost grab it, is a true treat. And you know, it comes with a little bit more listening and a little bit more paying attention, because there is this instrument that is outside of them, whereas our instrument is us. So there's a very fine tuning, I think, that we have to find with each other in space, and how do we
push those boundaries? How do we respect them? And how do we really like dance with each other within that musical space, I think.
And is the point, Bobbi, that the musicians are not just static figures, but are part of the motion, even if, I mean, Coleman's a cellist, so there's just so much motion he's going to be able to do. But you know, that kind of blurring of the distinction between the disciplines, is that an important part here?
Yes. I think always when we kind of go into a process, we're asking a lot of the whys and the how. Why does this person do what they do, and how do they do what they do? And I feel like when we know those answers, for me, everyone is dancing. It doesn't matter what they're doing. We're in the sphere, and we're in like the motion that we are all dancing together, even if it looks different than what you would consider dancing. And so for me, you know, we're all dancers and musicians and artists and people, and first we're people, and we happen to do these things that we express ourselves in which we express ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they take different forms, but they're ultimately trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coleman, as I say, as a cellist, you're kind of pinned to a spot, generally speaking. But there is a kind of choreography to playing the instrument sort of built into being a cellist, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a very specific physicality to being a cellist. It's actually through my cello playing that Julia and Bobbi and Orr made me realize that I was more than just a musician. I think it was a remark about my feet, the way I sort of stand on my tippy toes and cross them at the base of the cello. When I was sight reading one night, that they said, well, Coleman, you may just be a dancer. And yeah, it's I always think of it as, you know, being a musician is fungible to many other disciplines. It's closest, I think, in analogy to acting, in that you're taking a written text, a script, you're embodying it and expressing it in a way that makes the audience believe that it is your words, you are the character. That's very much what we do with music, and it's not much farther a stretch for dancing. It's maybe a slightly more abstract language, but when I think the first experience I had with dance was with Orr, actually. Our director, Zach Winokur, put us in a barn in a dance studio together and said, make a piece. The only rule is, Coleman, you're not allowed to play cello. I have no dance training up to this point, or acting training, and but I did find the language of dance to be very similar to how we build phrases with music, with using expression and memorizing certain choreography and movements. And we ended up with a pretty cool piece, I think, about a 15-minute work. We haven't titled it yet, and we haven't performed it officially yet, but that was my first experience working with dancers anyway. And it just made me realize that the two art forms are so intimately related and easily translatable.
Before we get too far from the broken theater / open rehearsal relationship, Bobbi, why don't we hear and see a little bit of this is broken theater that we're about to see, right? So it was
actually in process of broken theater, so it's also in process of open rehearsal.
So how similar is what we're about to see to what we will see in 2 weeks?
It will be in the a very similar tone and the same people and the same world.
Okay,
We'll
so
see that.
let's watch a little bit of AMOC's Broken Theater. That's a bit of Broken Theater, which has now spawned the new piece, Open Rehearsal. What is the music there?
Yeah, that's a piece by Johann Paul von Westhoff, who is a composer. That piece was written, I think, in 1695, in a German piece, one of the first sort of polyphonic pieces written for cello violin.
And is that your performance?
Yes.
There's a little bit of an oral sleight of hand because there's what sounds like surface noise from an old 78 RPM disc going through the entire piece. Where does that come from? Why is it there? I mean, to go back to the questions Bobbi was saying, how do you do it? Why do you do it? How is that there? Why is that there?
Yes. So Keir, this was in lockdown, and Keir, you were in New Zealand at the time.
Or en route, yeah.
Yeah. And we had hoped that Keir would be with us. And the closest thing we could do was kind of justify putting a record on and playing his recording and us dancing to it. So earlier in that recording, you see someone put a record on and it is going around.
Right. It's an improbably long stretch of surface noise before the violin actually comes in. So it, and that is a sound that to most people, maybe not to the youngest generation of listeners, but that is just the surface noise is a very evocative sound. I'm sure that was intentional on your part.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. What what about the music in open rehearsal, which ranges from the 12th century German abbess Hildegard von Bingen to the contemporary Italian cellist and composer Giovanni Sollima? Who picked that music? Was that a kind of collaborative thing?
Yes, very much so. I mean, before starting a process, we make a big bank of music and everyone contributes. I think for Mass Mocha time, Coleman, you made us a huge list of pieces, and also kind of people bring in different ideas, and we start to kind of gather the world. And in that, it kind of leads to another thing, or different paths are followed or not followed, and we start to try and make sense of why this would go into this and what would inspire that, and why would this person want to play this, or why would they want to dance to it, and trying to find a common language between all of us for the world that we're trying to create.
And so, or do you have a say in, as Bobbi was just saying or suggesting, do you hear or feel pieces of music and say, that is something I would dance to, that is something I would not dance to? Is that part of the process?
Yeah, definitely. I think each one of the cast members is bringing, like Bobbi just said, bring some tracks, some music tunes, and then Bobbi and usually Coleman and Keir kind of like sit together and brainstorm which are, for that reason or another, which are the right ones for the world that we're trying to create.
Is there a kind of a narrative arc to open rehearsal?
Yes, there is. But you will have to come experience it.
Okay.
Yes.
How closely tied is that arc to the arc of the music, which does, kind of flit from time period to time period?
Mm-hmm. Coleman, what would you say?
I think it's less about the period of time than it is about the emotional arc. I believe open rehearsal will begin with the Sollima, or at least it's very close to the beginning.
It is. I think it is listed first.
It is just like an incredibly frenetic, energized piece, and it just like, right out of the gate sets the tone for the rest of the piece, and everything from that sort of descends, I'd say, all the way down to the Chopin, which is a very emotional, sentimental almost piece.
Mm-hmm.
Is it. So it tends to, but I don't think we have, I think it's an emergent sort of architecture. It's not like we plot it out beforehand and then say this needs to go there and this needs to go there, and we have a narrative. It just seems to emerge and feels right whenever we create these pieces. And sometimes we do shuffle. Sometimes we say, oh, that doesn't quite fit there. We need to put this like 3 pieces earlier or whatever. But it very much develops alongside the dance that we're creating and the story that we're trying to tell.
Now, it seems to me that in Broken Theater, we, the audience, would actually hear you say, maybe we should try that piece over there. Is that, Bobbi, does that part of the creative process still unfold before us in open rehearsal?
Yes, it will unfold. And I think some little kind of clues and understandings of the piece will be revealed within the structure of open rehearsal, where some arguments can happen, some readjustments can happen, some let's start over and try it this way, let's kind of playing with the fictional aspect of a rehearsal, and also the truth of a rehearsal and the performance of that rehearsal.
So in fact, then you're all playing characters as well as playing dancers and musicians. So that's an interesting kind of meta take on theatricality. Julia, you're nodding. How is that? I mean, let's take you for an example. How do you see your character or characters, and how do they develop during the course of the piece?
Well, I'm not going to reveal who I am because that feels a bit too much to say, but I just think you've got it right on, that this kind of cracking open of making and process and performance, and how much of our lives influence that and vice versa is really kind of where we're trying to exist. So there is that battle also within yourself of like, wow, I'm taking on my character a little bit too much, and maybe I need to step back and just be myself here. So there is that kind of play of real character study, and sometimes in rehearsal it's hard for us to know when we're in or when we're out. Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, I think that play and that friction is a really exciting, just take into art making and life building and living.
Well, and there's a long history of narrative dance pieces where dancers are used to playing characters, less so for musicians like Coleman and Keir. So Keir, I mean, are you a character in the course of this piece?
I would probably. I think that it's funny. I think that in the pieces that we've done together that have been more theatrical, I am thinking more along the lines of like music and musical dramaturgy rather than character, just because that's kind of more how my mind works. And I think rather than trying to get into character, so to speak, more what I think about is like how music can enhance sort of like theatrical situations, and thinking dramaturgically about like, it's interesting, like you were asking questions before about like the plotting, the musical narrative, and that's something very much you think about if you're programming a recital. But I think like for these contexts, it's interesting to think about like how will music like amplify this movement or amplify this conflict or amplify this space or zone. And one of the things we talk a lot about is like mixing levels of like gesture and sound and music. Almost like you're at a mixing board and you're like, okay, there's too much gesture here to like justify this level of activity in the music, or there's too much going on in the music to like justify this level of activity within the dancers. So there's a lot of like sensitivity and play there. And yeah, I mean, more like the more I am in this world, the more I really think that that aspect of like musical dramaturgy is really like my main function, is to create drama, to create conflict, to create space and vibe and transitional influence through like tones and shifts of timbre and rhythm, because those are all things shared between dancers and musicians: color, rhythm, speed, texture.
It's interesting you mentioned the word conflict in there, because one of the things that strikes me, Bobbi, about the just the way the setup is with people in a circle and performers in the middle of it, the idea of watching, of being watched, is kind of baked in to broken theater and presumably in open rehearsal as well.
Yes.
Well, that's that can be a discomforting thing for an audience. I'm wondering if it is for you as performers as well, but except that that's part and parcel of performing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that, it's a constant conversation of, it's something that you love and look for, and it's something that haunts you and keeps you up at night. It's that constant kind of push and pull that also we can't stop. It's like, and so I think I've always loved that part of being a performer, and kind of the times that I didn't want to perform or I had the hardest time were usually the best, when I was at my best. And kind of understanding like that whole journey. And I love that about artists and about performers, of their kind of artistic relationship and their personal relationship with what they do, and how much conflict is inside of that, and how much love and care and drive, and there's so much in there to kind of share and try to express.
Yeah, that's a lot to pack into a bare set with very bare bones, just a circle of chairs and people who are in clothing that seems to be everyday clothing. I mean, there's something very quotidian about the mise en scène, even as you're dealing with these kind of big ideas. If we dip back into Broken Theater and watch another clip, is this, Julia, I think we're about to see you in this next clip. What can you tell us about this?
Is it Gustav?
Yes.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the kind of first seed we had with it. We were dealing with lots of questions of creating and destroying. And there's another one I think that we had for this solo.
I remember back when we created this section, every day we would meet and we would say we'd say, why are you here? Each person had to kind of go away from the circle and come back, and they would have to say, I am here. And they would continue. And some people would either bring a piece of music or say a poem or make a dance. And it was kind of like our sharing circle. And so a lot of these movements and gestures came from things that kind of were thrown into the circle, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I was missing, of just a very large question of why are you here? And I think many of us came with, it was such a packed moment in time, and none of us had been doing what we do for many months, which is very odd. Of course we have that downtime sometimes, but to not be in the act of creating and then have this opportunity to create again and have such openness in that space, but also I think we each had something we wanted to say or just feel again. I think feeling and touching and seeing other people again was a huge inspiration for this.
All right, let's watch another excerpt from Broken Theater, from whence the new piece Open Rehearsal comes. So Coleman was talking before about the similarity between musicians and actors, where you're taking a written text and trying to present it in a way that suggests you are doing it in the moment. But of course, improvising musicians, jazz musicians, you know, musicians from traditions elsewhere in the world are not working from written texts, from written scripts, and are kind of making the music in the moment. And I'm wondering if there's an analogy to the way the three of you who are dancing in the piece created your parts. Was there a kind of choreographed score all the time, or were there moments of improvisation, of movement in the moment? I'll ask you first, Julia, because we just saw you. What was happening there? How much of that was planned and how much of that was not?
That is all choreographed. And I have a sense of rhythm, but I often think of choreography as kind of like a framework that I get to play inside of, maybe much how musicians think of a score. So I also am trying to surprise myself as well as those around me. But I think in the initial process, Vestov was kind of this moment where we all got to improvise and like really go for broke of like, you haven't danced for 5 months with people in the room. What are you feeling? And like, I think all of these solos kind of came from that place of confrontation, rage, but also like deep passion of not being able to do what we do.
Mm-hmm. And or Bobbi?
It's very similar to what Julia just said. For me, yes, there's always the choreographic frame of how Julia described it now, but I am a person who really loves improvisation, and being in the moment is an essential thing for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. What I do. So in most of the pieces that we've been making together, Keir, Coleman, Julia, Bobbi, and I, there are a lot of parts that are just improvisation, and there are a lot of parts that are choreographed till the last, detail. And I think this combination of things is really crucial to the atmosphere we're trying to create.
Yeah. I mean, it keeps things very alive, and it's like a really good kind of like always playing between the two keeps us always listening to each other, and it keeps each other on our toes. Yeah, and actually I remember Vestov first, Keir and I did this piece in a study on effort, the first piece we made together, and we always talked about how could Keir kind of play this set piece of music as if he were improvising, and how could I improvise as if it were set, and where does that kind of intersect? And so I think that kind of follows us in a lot of the ways that we approach all of the work of how do we still find the element of surprise even if things are to a T, and how do we find the element of stability even when things are completely unknown?
Right.
Yeah.
And Keir, playing a 17th century violin work. I mean, scoring notation back in the 17th century was not, this is not Elliott Carter, where every gesture and every microsecond is spelled out in the score. There is playing Baroque music, and playing it well does require a sort of improvisatory technique, doesn't it?
Definitely. And I was thinking of, as I was watching this, I was like, oh, I didn't do a lot of improvisation in this recording because I think the recording, well, yeah, I mean, when you get in a recording studio, it's, a whole different situation. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ornamentation that's possible in Vestov. But I mean, I think that goes to, Bobby's point of, and Julia's point of there being so many levels of improvisation. I mean, I think improvisation starts in in decision making, and there's a lot of decision making to be made in even a set piece of music. And then ornamentation adds a level of improvisation. Working with the dancer, moving in the space with you adds another level of improvisation and play with time and rhythm and dynamics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there have been moments in some of our pieces where we're also playing with notes, and so I think it's just various levels of it, and it is about finding the right support for whatever is happening.
All right, so the new piece, Open Rehearsal, is on Friday the 10th and Sunday the 12th, but in between, many of you are doing How to Fall Apart, or you're doing a spin-off of the spin-off. If Open Rehearsal is a spin-off from Broken Theater, tell us about The Cello Player.
Yeah. So The Cello Player was born, actually it started with a duet that Yanis Logothetis, who's another cast member and a phenomenal dancer and a human being, who's in Broken Theater. And we created, Bobbi asked us to make a duet for us. We called it the Old Men Duet. And it's about, we started, the initial idea was this ancient relationship between these two men who are both very good friends, but also the enemies of each other and foes. And we started developing a lot of material, set material, actually, choreographically set material. And then, and slowly, we kind of like formed a 6-minute duet that had so many hues and colors and different ideas and fantasies cutting through. It was kind of messy, almost chaotic. And at some point, we understood that we would like to expand upon this duet and make it a little longer. And it was obvious, that the third wheel has to be Monsieur Coleman Itzkoff, who's also in the actual piece of Broken Theater, he's playing the Bach. Is it the jig from the second suite? Yeah. And then we just started, brainstorming about what it would be if these three men try to coexist in the same space.
Huh. It sounds very similar to the final clip from Broken Theater that we have, the two men and the cello. So this is a reiteration of an iteration of something that we can watch now. This is from Broken Theater, but it'll give you just an idea of what will happen on Saturday at the Cello Player. When the first time I saw that, before Coleman comes in with the cello, I was put in mind of sign language for some reason.
Oh, amazing. That's a huge compliment. Thank you.
There was something very, sort of linguistic and communicative about the motion of the two men. So that'll give us a little bit of an idea of what to expect from the cello player on Saturday, the 11th. I, for one, am really looking forward to a whole weekend with these pieces, How to Fall Apart, the cello player, and of course, the world premiere of Open Rehearsal. To the five of you, thank you all for spending some time with us, and to everyone who has tuned in. I will see you in 2 weeks in Ojai.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.